Hello everyone, wishing you a wonderful day ahead. Today, we're diving into a story filled with tension, secrets, and love put to the ultimate test. Will James choose his father's demand for a DNA test or protect the woman he still loves? Stay with me to find out. And if you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next videos. The late afternoon sun slipped through the cracks in the tin roof of the lumberyard, sending thin golden beams across towering stacks of timber. The air was thick with the sharp scent of pine resin and fine sawdust that clung to the skin. Somewhere in the distance, chainsaws roared, biting into wood with a relentless growl. James stood in the middle of it all, hands tucked into his pockets, posture straight, eyes sharp. He moved slowly past each stack of logs, scanning the grain, the color, the cut. Nothing escaped him. "Did you check everything carefully?" he asked, voice low but heavy with pressure. "After what happened with John, we can't afford any more mistakes. The work has to be meticulous." His assistant nodded quickly, almost too quickly. "Yes, sir. I checked very carefully." James didn't answer right away. He placed his palm against a thick log, feeling the rough bark beneath his fingers. He exhaled, long and controlled, but tension still lingered in his shoulders. Beyond the open warehouse doors, dark clouds were slowly gathering at the edge of the sky. Rain was coming, and with it, delays. Timber shipments were already heavy this season. Orders needed to go out before Tet, but workers had been taking more leave than usual. "So many absences lately," James muttered, eyes still on the horizon. "How are we supposed to handle this?" The assistant hesitated. "We could offer temporary raises, maybe shorten shifts, add incentives to attract new hires for the holiday period." Silence stretched between them. James wasn't just calculating numbers. He was calculating risks, reputation, stability, the future of a company he had fought hard to rebuild. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Draft a detailed plan. Break down the costs, projected output, everything. Send it to me tonight. If it makes sense, we'll implement it." "Yes, sir." On the surface, his tone was calm, decisive, the voice of a CEO. But deep in his eyes was something else. Worry, not just about timber, not just about money, about someone he used to love. The distant scream of a chainsaw cut through the air again, sharp and violent. For a brief second, it felt like something inside his chest was being torn open the same way. James turned away and walked toward the exit of the yard. Each step felt heavier than it should. The weight of responsibility followed him, but so did regret. And regret was harder to carry. Under the dim yellow light of a roadside eatery, steam rose from a large boiling pot, carrying the sweet scent of simmering sweet potatoes into the cool evening air. She sat beside the small child, gently wiping dirt from the little one's cheek. "It's dirty, sweetheart. Sit still for me, okay?" The child nodded obediently, eyes wide and sparkling as they watched the pot bubble. The world around them was loud, motorbikes passing, vendors calling out. But inside this tiny stall, it felt strangely peaceful. "How much is this?" the child asked in a bright, innocent voice. "Just 10,000, little one," the vendor replied kindly. She waited patiently until the sweet potatoes were perfectly soft. When they were ready, she placed the steaming plate in front of the child. "Do you like this dish?" "Yes, thank you so much." The child picked up a piece, blew on it carefully, then took a big bite. Instantly, their face lit up. Pure joy, simple and unfiltered, like sunlight breaking through heavy clouds. She watched quietly. In that small, struggling moment, warmth bloomed inside her chest. Life had been hard. Days were long. Money was tight. But seeing that smile made everything feel a little lighter. Outside, traffic continued to roar. The city didn't slow down for anyone. But in this tiny corner of the roadside stall, time seemed to pause. Was it maternal love? Was it simple kindness? Maybe it was just two souls finding comfort in each other in a world that rarely showed mercy. She reached over and stroked the child's hair gently. "It's so delicious," the child said again, cheeks full. She smiled back, tired but real, like a small flame stubbornly burning against the cold night air. The old wooden door creaked open. An uncle stepped inside, arms loaded with heavy Tet gift bags wrapped in bright red paper. Diep looked up, slightly startled, but quickly composed herself. She offered a polite smile. "Uncle came to visit. Please, come in and sit." She greeted him properly for the new year, wishing him health, prosperity, business success. Her tone was respectful, controlled. He sat down slowly, placing the gift bags on the table. His voice, when he spoke, was low and deliberate. "You're still determined not to give up, James." Diep paused. "I've already answered you many times," she said softly. "I don't want to repeat it." The air thickened instantly. The uncle let out a bitter laugh. "Back then, you left me for a rich man. Now my son is rich and your daughter is poor. I will never allow your daughter to be with my son." His eyes were cold. "This grudge I will never forget." The words sliced straight through her. Diep lowered her head, fingers gripping the hem of her shirt. Old pain resurfaced, sharp and familiar. He stood up, his tone turning icy. "James will definitely come to take Diep's hair for a DNA test. We have to leave the hair here." Then he turned and walked out, footsteps firm and unyielding. The door closed. Silence swallowed the room. Diep remained seated, unmoving. Tears fell quietly onto her lap. The Tet gift bags sat untouched on the table, bright and festive, but they brought her no joy, only pressure, only fear. She stared at the doorway, where his figure had disappeared. Why does hatred last so long? And why does James still insist on coming back? The small house felt emptier than ever. Under the flickering oil lamp, shadows danced across her tired face. She reached out and touched the edge of the gift bag, absent-mindedly. "Why would he suddenly bring me gifts?" she murmured to herself. "He's always hated me." Memories surged like waves. The arguments, the accusations, the bitter words from years ago. She stood and stepped out onto the porch. A cold evening breeze swept through her short hair. Instinctively, she lifted a hand to touch it. "James will definitely come to take Diep's hair for testing." The warning echoed in her mind. A chill ran down her spine. She looked out at the distant fields where the red glow of sunset slowly faded into darkness. Fear crept in quietly. Fear of truth being exposed, of buried secrets resurfacing. But deep down, there was something else too. Hope. A fragile hope that James was not like his father, that he came back for love, not for proof. Diep closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in slowly. Then she turned back inside and shut the door behind her, as if she could lock the past outside. But inside her chest, the storm was just beginning. The house was quiet when James appeared at the doorway. He still carried the faint scent of sawdust and pine from the lumberyard. For a moment, he just stood there, looking at her as if trying to measure the distance between them. Years of silence, condensed into a single glance. "On my way here, I ran into Dad," he said casually. "He mentioned he stopped by to give you Tet gifts." Diep nodded softly. "Yes, Uncle brought some presents." There was a brief pause, neither of them mentioning the tension that must have filled this room before he arrived. James forced a small smile. "I finished work early tonight. I was thinking, maybe we could go into the city for dinner." Diep looked at him, surprised. It had been a long time since he'd asked her something so simple. "It's been a while," she admitted, "since we went anywhere together." She told him about her day, harvesting sweet potatoes, how Nee's grandmother had come to take the child out to play, how she'd spent most of the afternoon alone. "That old lady?" James asked gently. "You trust her?" Diep nodded without hesitation. "I do. I know what kind of person she is." He studied her face carefully. "You're not worried she might have some hidden intention?" She shook her head. "No, I don't think so." James didn't push further. Instead, he mentioned that the company would soon close for Tet. It was later than usual this year. Most of the workers were local, and the holiday bonuses for overtime had been too tempting to resist. Then his tone softened. "So, dinner, just you and me." For the first time that day, Diep smiled. "Yes," she said quietly. "Let's go." In that modest house, surrounded by years of misunderstanding and scars, something small flickered back to life. Not certainty, not forgiveness, just possibility. James felt his chest lighten slightly, though he knew full well that unresolved truths were still lurking beneath the surface. Diep stepped outside to herd the chickens back into their enclosure. Their clucking echoed through the fading twilight. James remained inside. His eyes drifted across the simple room. The wooden table, the oil lamp, the neatly folded clothes. Everything was humble, but carefully kept. Then his gaze landed on the bed. Short strands of hair were scattered across the pillow. He frowned slightly and stepped closer. "Why is her hair so short?" he murmured. He reached down, fingers brushing against one fragile strand, and suddenly his father's voice thundered in his mind. "James will definitely come to take Diep's hair for a DNA test." His hand froze. The air in the room felt heavier. He stared at the thin strands resting against his palm. They looked harmless, weightless, but they carried the potential to destroy everything. James stood there, caught between two forces, pulling him in opposite directions. On one side, his genuine feelings for Diep, the memories, the shared history, the tenderness that never fully disappeared. On the other, his father's pressure, family duty, suspicion, the relentless demand for proof. He clenched his fist slowly, the strand of hair slipping from his fingers back onto the pillow. He didn't want to hurt her, but the situation was spiraling beyond his control. Footsteps approached from outside. Diep re-entered the house, brushing dust from her hands. "I'm done." James straightened instantly, masking the storm inside him. "Good," he said lightly. "And your gift box, I'll bring it inside properly for you." She nodded, unaware of the battle raging just inches away from her. He watched her for a moment, heart tightening painfully. Between them hung an invisible blade, suspended mid-air. All it needed was one push. They stepped outside together. A thin crescent moon peeked from behind the bamboo grove, casting pale silver light over their shadows. The night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of damp soil. James walked ahead and opened the passenger door for her. "Careful," he said softly. Diep settled into the seat, smoothing her skirt. He closed the door gently, then moved around to the driver's side. When he sat down and gripped the steering wheel, his hands felt slightly colder than before. The image of those strands of hair wouldn't leave his mind. Diep turned toward him with a small, nostalgic smile. "It really has been a long time since we did something like this." James let out a faint laugh. "Yeah, too long." He started the engine. The car rolled forward slowly, leaving behind the small house with its flickering oil lamp and unspoken secrets. Inside the quiet cabin, only the low hum of the engine filled the silence. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Streetlights flickered past the windshield, casting brief shadows across Diep's face. She looked calm, almost peaceful. James glanced at her from the corner of his eye. How could someone look so composed when the past was still so close to unraveling everything? He tightened his grip on the wheel. If he followed his father's demands, he might uncover the truth, but at what cost? If he refused, he would be defying his own family. The road stretched ahead, long and dimly lit, leading toward the distant glow of city lights. Diep leaned back slightly, gazing out the window. "Do you remember," she asked softly, "the first time you took me into the city? You were so nervous, you missed 3 turns." James smiled faintly. "I remember you laughing at me." "I wasn't laughing at you," she said. "I was laughing because you looked so serious." The memory hung between them, like a fragile bridge. For a brief moment, it almost felt as if time had folded back on itself, as if none of the arguments, the separations, the bitterness had ever happened. Just 2 young people driving into the city, full of hope. But reality was different now. James inhaled deeply. No matter what happened, he made a silent vow. He would protect her, even if it meant standing against his own father, even if it meant facing consequences he wasn't ready for. The city lights grew brighter as they approached, shimmering like distant stars. Traffic thickened, voices and music blending into the night. Inside the car, however, the atmosphere remained quiet. 2 people who once loved each other now sat side by side again, close enough to touch, close enough to hurt. Night settled fully around them, carrying fragile hope and heavy regret. The road ahead was uncertain, but for now, they drove forward together,